All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and start. I want to say thank you all for being here today. We appreciate your time, appreciate your energy. We have a stellar team from Southern Methodist University to join us today to give us some really good information about the types of graduate degrees in business. It's not necessarily just an MBA, and there are professional degrees that sort of don't necessarily have names, but they definitely feed an interest point and do some really deep dives into educational components of business. I actually graduated from one. I got my master's in organizational development, which is basically a component of business and sort of like leadership and management and change management, to sort of orchestrating strategy and working with the people component as the organizations and businesses begin to change their direction. So it's kind of just looking at that change management component. Well, so before we get into this, I want to take a moment just to acknowledge our lands that we're on, to acknowledge the people that we bring with us, our ancestors, our community, our memories, and ask that we help them help us to listen and help us to sort of take in what we need to know, and then offer up the information that we need to sort of learn today. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Jill Melton and Gail Sargent, and I'll let them sort of tell us a little bit more about what they know of these degrees and how we can benefit from them.
Yeah, thank you. We got a little echo there. That's all right. The joys of Zoom these days. So I just want to thank everyone for joining us today. Jill and I are really excited to be here with you to talk a little bit more about graduate business education, what that means. And today we're going to go a little bit deeper into that. So we're going to talk about some degree options, what you can do with those degrees once you graduate, how to pay for it, which is always a big question that students have. Some things to consider when you're looking at different schools, as well as a bit about, what an application, what the admissions process is like. We'll definitely have some time for Q&A at the end, but feel free to put something in the chat if it's applicable, and we can try to answer it as we go along too. I'm happy to kind of stop and take questions too. Just let's make this conversational if there's someone with a question out there. All right, so why should you get a business degree? So there are a lot of different reasons for a lot of different students, and there's a lot of different programs out there. But a big part of it is to maybe build on a skill gap that you have. Maybe you need to increase your leadership skills or some of those softer skills, or maybe you're looking more for a quantitative skill, such as you want to increase your finance skills or your accounting skills. That's one reason. Another reason might be that you want to explore a new career path, a new industry. You're looking to increase your network, or you're looking to maybe get a promotion in your current role. A lot of times also students look to it as a confidence builder and to learn more about business in that sense. All right, so we mentioned a little bit, and Jack did as well, that there are a lot of degrees out there. It can be a little overwhelming, a little confusing. I'm mostly going to focus on MBA and specialized master's degrees, but I did want to touch a little bit on certificate programs as well. So those are usually offered online from a variety of schools. I know Harvard has a lot out there. Usually it's like a data analytics certificate or something of that nature. Not necessarily an accredited degree by any means, but it is a good option if you just want something short, maybe a few hours online to put on your resume or to boost that skill set. Now with the specialized master's degrees, I'll go into those first. So those are usually more for early career students. So you're looking at maybe less than 2 years of work experience right out of undergrad. If that's you, this might be something for right up your alley. These degrees are more specialized, as the name says. They're focused on a specific industry. So you're looking at maybe a master's in business analytics, or a master's in finance, or master's in accounting. Usually you want to go into that industry or that function once you graduate. So it's not a broad business degree. You're not going to take a lot of classes in, say, marketing if you're doing an accounting degree, but you're really going to focus on those accounting classes and build those skills. Now, these aren't just for early career students. Oftentimes we have, working professionals or older students who really want to focus on that industry. That could be another method. Just be prepared. You might be in a classroom with mostly 22, 23-year-olds, I would say. These programs are usually offered full-time on campus, which you'll be taking classes, Monday through Thursday for about a year. But a lot of schools do offer them online or part-time as well. So usually if it's part-time, you're looking at 2 years for the program. And a lot of them also offer experiential learning opportunities. For early career programs especially, this is a really great way to gain some experience while you're going to school full-time. So for example, our business analytics program has a capstone project or an internship built into the curriculum. So just a way to connect with the community and grow those skills. Just want to pause. I see we have some things going in the chat. We all good on questions, everyone?
Yeah, we did just have one that came in. What is the GPA requirement? So Gail, if you wanted to answer that, I would say at this point it's a fairly broad answer.
Yeah, so most schools don't have a minimum GPA requirement, and then Jill will definitely touch on some of the admissions criteria later on. But as far as GPA goes, that's just one thing we consider when looking at different programs. I would say most schools are kind of looking for something around a 3.0. If it's below that though, I would still encourage you to apply. There are different things that we look at. So if you have a lower GPA and you went to school 10 years ago, but you have amazing work experience or you have contributed to your community, that's just one aspect of your application. So there are other things that can help balance that out, such as a test score. But I think Jill will talk a little bit more about that near the end. All right, so moving on. So the other bucket of graduate business degrees are MBA programs. There's a lot that falls under this umbrella. There are full-time programs, working professional programs, online programs. I'm going to start off with the full-time and then I'll get to some of our working professional programs next. So with the full-time MBA, these are more mid-level careers. First of all MBA programs, you usually have to have about 2 years of work experience. There are some that are direct out of undergrad. We, for example, have one that's spread out a little bit more over 3 years and that requires you to work during the program, but most full-time programs are geared towards students with a minimum of 2 years work experience, but most have at least 4 or 5. Most full-time MBA programs are about 2 years. That's the traditional program. You're on campus fall, spring, and then you take an internship and then you come back your second year. There are some that are more 1-year programs where you're not necessarily looking to utilize that internship. You're not looking to switch industries. But most MBA programs, you're coming in, maybe you're looking to go from working in finance to working in marketing, and you're not sure how to make that switch. So maybe you go get an MBA and then you utilize that summer internship to make that pivot, to gain that experience and tell that story. A lot of these are on campus during the week. For most full-time programs, you're looking at classes again, Monday through Thursdays. Most schools have Fridays off because students are at the age where they have other life commitments. Maybe they're going to a wedding or they have a family. It just really depends. And then also sometimes full-time MBA programs have dual degree options. This could be like a JD MBA, where you're doing a degree at the law school at the same time as you're doing your MBA. So something to keep in mind if there's something else you're interested in tying to that business degree. So what does the student journey look like for the MBA for full-time students? So usually these start in August. I would say applications start the following fall all the way up to, when you start in August. So just keep that in mind. But most start in the summer, end of summer. You're doing some academic prep before you get on campus because not everyone has to come in with a business background. Most schools, along with SMU, we're looking to build a diverse class, and that includes people from different backgrounds, both in their work experience as well as their undergraduate degrees. If everyone came in with a marketing degree from SMU and worked at like the Richards Group in Dallas, it'd be really boring because everyone would have the same work experience. And the classroom really is built on sharing perspectives and sharing your background. So there is that prep over the summer to get you ready. Then you have orientation and you start your core required courses. This is pretty common across most business schools. You start your required classes and doing internship search. So that internship is over the summer, but you start meeting companies right after Labor Day, so really early in September. In the spring, you continue to take those required classes and you start doing some of your elective classes, which are the classes you opt into, maybe on a specific concentration or area that you want to focus on. There are also other experiential learning opportunities and some international trips, depending on the school you're going to. That summer, that internship, that coveted internship, usually it's about 10 weeks, a wide variety. Most schools will help you find that. It's not, they don't give it to you on a silver platter by any means. There's still some work involved, but Most schools have resources for that, which I'll touch on in a bit. And then in the spring and fall of your second year, you continue to take electives and look for jobs. All right, so that's the full-time side of things. But a lot of students, they don't necessarily want to quit their job and go back to school full-time. So an option, if you're still looking to increase your knowledge and gain those skill sets, but continue working, might be a working professional MBA. It's a lot more flexible. There are some that are offered on campus, such as a professional MBA, which maybe you meet twice a week in the evenings. So SMU, we do Tuesdays and Thursday evenings on campus, or Tuesdays and Saturdays. If you want to be a virtual experience, which is key in COVID and in the world today, technology is great, much better than when I was an undergrad, that's for sure. And that gives you the experience to do in a program anywhere in the world. It can be very flexible. You still have some class content, maybe you watch ahead of time, so asynchronous material. And then you have your class where you meet live with other students. It's not just all kind of sent to you ahead of time, there's that interaction piece to it. And these, like I said, are pretty flexible. So most of these start in the summer as well, but there are some that start in spring and winter too. So January, May, August. So again, kind of the ability to, choose what fits best for you. And also you still have access at most schools to on-campus resources, the Career Center, joining clubs. I would say make sure you're looking at that school in particular, but usually that is still an option. So that student journey looks a little bit different. You're still getting the curriculum, you're still getting the electives, it's just a little bit more customized for you. All right, I'll pause here, make sure we don't have any questions on that side of things before talking more about careers.
Nope, no additional questions in the chat related to the specifics.
All right, perfect. Thanks, Jill. All right, so now you've gotten this degree, what are you gonna do with it? Why have you put the time and money into the degree? So there are a lot of different things you can do with a business degree. You don't necessarily have to do one of the 6 on the screen. Those are just really popular fields. So consulting, finance, you can go work for a startup. You can take your degree back, maybe work in your tribal council, put those skills to use. It depends on your individual goals and passions, and those will come across in the interview for that school. And the school you're interviewing with will tell you if that's something they can kind of help you with or not. At least they should. But to put things a little bit more into perspective, I went on and did some LinkedIn stalking at some of our graduates from different programs and pulled out some real titles from students that graduated maybe last year. So obviously the role is going to depend on what type of program you go into. So those early career programs, those MS programs, business school is very big on acronyms, as you probably discovered from our presentation already. But those specialized master's programs, the first one, someone in our business analytics program with limited work experience beforehand went to do an analytics role at Whole Foods. Another student did the accounting program. Accounting, most students go on to work for one of the big 4. So this person ended up at PwC doing assurance. You also have students who work in finance. So whether that's corporate finance roles, but this person, they did an early entry-level analytics role at Goldman Sachs after doing the master's in finance program. You also have some of our MBA students. Consulting is big. Consulting, people are like, what does that actually mean? So what that means is they work very long hours. There's a very nice salary attached to that. But usually you're traveling Monday through Thursday in non-COVID world. You're helping another company that, say if you're a consultant at Deloitte, that is a client of yours. You're on site, you're helping manage a problem that they can't solve, and they've hired the consultants to work for. There are different specialties within that. So some work in human resources consulting, management consulting, strategy consulting. That's a little bit more on that. But also, brand manager at PepsiCo, product manager at Microsoft or tech industries. There's also leadership rotational programs, which are a great way to kind of explore different roles within a company. AT&T is well known for that in the Dallas area. Or, a traditional, stereotypical, I guess you could say, MBA job would be like an investment banking role as well. And I've just thrown in some average starting salaries, kind of give you a picture later on for when we talk about financing. This does depend on the program and the school as well. But most schools should share this information with you as you're going through the process. All right. And it's always good to know what types of companies come on campus. These are just some of our corporate partners, but most schools have relationships with companies across the US. Again, you don't necessarily have to recruit at one of these companies. You can do an off-campus search. but your Career Center should help you through that search process. All right, and just some things to keep in mind when working with your Career Services Center. They should help you with some career coaching. Some schools provide lifelong support to their alums, so something to kind of look into. Also, what type of companies they bring on campus, like we just mentioned. Do they provide mentorship? Do they work on negotiating salaries? There's a lot your Career Center can help you with while you're a student and once you graduate. Okay, so that's a little bit on careers. I'm going to pop over to how to actually pay for your degree now, financing your degree. Graduate business school, I won't lie, it can be pretty expensive. There's a wide range of options out there though. So you have some schools that have in-state tuition, some schools that have out-of-state tuitions, or private universities. To give you a generic idea of costs, most MBA programs, you're probably looking at about $100,000 for a full-time program. That can change if you go to a school with in-state tuition. For specialized master's programs, you're probably looking at anywhere from $30,000 to $70,000. So that's sticker price. But most schools do give out scholarships, and it's definitely something that you should look into. So some schools do merit-based scholarships. What that means is we're looking at your application, we're looking at that GPA that someone mentioned earlier, we're looking at your test scores, how well you interview, what's your EQ, your emotional intelligence. Do we think you're going to add value to the community? Are you going to be involved, or are you just going to kind of go to class and go home? There's also needs-based scholarships at some schools, and also financial aid. So you can look at FAFSA for federal loans, also private loans. Some companies I put on there, Discover, Prodigy, they're willing to work with students. And then, if you're going to school part-time or a working professional, a lot of employers will help you with that. So a lot of employers have tuition assistance programs. It's definitely something that you can reach out to your HR department and ask about. All right, I'm going to hand it over to Jill now, who will talk a little bit more about choosing your degree.
Thank you, Gail. So as part of the presentation, we wanted to put in a section really around what are some of the other questions you should be asking, or what are some of the other things you should be thinking about when evaluating different MBA and MS opportunities in a business school. So one key question I would say to ask is to ask, what are the experiential learning opportunities? And I've put here some examples of what they are at SMU Cox, just to kind of get you thinking a little bit about what the opportunities are. But one thing that we know is really impactful in earning your business education is the ability for you not only to learn in the classroom and learn the coursework and work on group projects, but also to apply that. One of the things I like to say is that business is a contact sport. The best way to learn it is to get out there and do it, and not necessarily be in just the classroom or the academics. So some of the things that we do at SMU Cox, we have different student-led organizations around professional development. We have a mentorship program, so that's always a good thing to know about as well. We do have different case competitions, and of course a business plan competition every year. And then we have 15 different centers and institutes, and one is our Business Leadership Center that's really focused on teaching students those executive communication and leadership skills. So, a broad question like what are the experiential learning opportunities can help you uncover what they are for each of the universities you're looking at. And then from there, you can determine, is this the best fit for me, or what am I really excited about? Because of course, every school has strengths and weaknesses, and every school has areas that they focus in, and all of those pros and cons. And so I think you really want to understand what that means for you in your personalized learning. Another question to ask is, what are the global opportunities? So Gail mentioned this a little bit in her overview, but I would say any program that's a good program is bringing students overseas or traveling throughout the US, really getting students out of their comfort zone, getting them out of the classroom. So this is related to experiential learning, but getting them out of the classroom and having them really connect with the business community. So again, two ways that we do this at SMU, just to give you an idea, we do bring students on international consulting trips. Sometimes they're short, sometimes they're 4 days. Sometimes they're long, sometimes they're more close to 10 or 11 days, but they are required for some programs, optional for other programs, but regardless, it's a way for you to get out and really do business and be a consultant. And then we have some other trips that are really specific to industry. So again, back to what I was saying earlier, asking those questions and really understanding what each business school has to offer, I think can really help you determine if that's the right program for you. Two other things to think about. One is location. Where are you located now? Where do you want to be located while you're studying business? Of course, if you're doing a full-time program or a part-time program or an online program, there's a lot of different options. But I also, we talk to a lot of students about campus location. Do you want to be downtown in more of an urban environment? Do you want to be in a residential campus, in a small town, more of that quintessential college town type of campus? And it's not just the environment in which you want to learn, it also can have really big implications on your job search and your future career. So how will your job search or the location help or hinder that job search? So you do want to be in an area, I would say, that has a good business community that is supporting the business school. Again, bringing in those companies into the classroom is really important, so you get that hands-on learning. So how involved is the business community in the school? You don't necessarily need to be in a large city to get that, but you do need to find, or I would advise you to find a school that does have good corporate connections and really has good partnerships. Another area to think about is student support. So what resources are there to help you? What does that model look like? What are the career support services, as Gail was talking about? Understand that inside and out. How involved are alumni on campus? Is there a mentorship program? Do they hire graduates? Can I connect with alumni for support? So I think all of that can really help you understand not only what you're getting in the classroom and in the pure educational academic piece, but what support services are outside of it. All right, now I want to drill in to the admissions process. So I know there were a couple of questions in the chat, so please feel free to pepper those as I'm going throughout. But I want to walk through the basic application components. And so I have a description of what they are and then a couple of my own notes. So of course, the online application. So a basic information form. Every school will have their own, super easy to find on their website. So it's always a good idea to take a look at that and understand what are the information fields that each school is looking for. Every school will require your academic transcripts for any undergraduate work as well as previous grad work done. Now, it can vary school to school if you need to submit official transcripts or unofficial transcripts. I would say always ask, because unofficial are usually free, where you have to pay for the official transcripts. So a lot of schools will accept during the admissions process the unofficial transcripts. And so, depending on how many schools you're applying to, that can really save up some money there. And then also know if you've done coursework at community college, or maybe you transferred schools in undergrad, understand if the school needs all of those transcripts or just the one from the graduating institution. Now, your resume. I would say this is one that sometimes applicants get a little bit, this takes more time, right? This is more complicated. This is harder than getting your transcripts, for example. But most business schools, I would say, they are looking for a professional resume and looking for results-oriented resume. So really, what have your results been? Definitely our tip is to include undergraduate leadership positions, anything you're doing in professional organizations. Really, for an application, I think more is better at this point. Usually, each school will have some form of written component, whether that's essays, an action plan, or a writing sample. So just make sure you understand what those components are. Same thing with professional references. Schools really vary in this area. It could be letters of recommendation, where it's actually a letter written by a supervisor, for example, or a professor, or it could be references or referrals, contact information that you need to submit. Now onto the standardized tests. So GMAT, GRE, and executive assessment are the three tests that are accepted by business schools. Although you're going to want to know for the specific program you're applying for in the specific school, which of those three they accept. Some will accept one, some will accept all. If there's a preference, you'll want to ask that as well. So that will certainly vary by school. And then the next slide, I'll talk a little bit more specifically about that. And then the final component is usually the interview. So typically schools, once we've received all of the application, it will be reviewed. The interview could happen virtually, it could happen on campus, it could be with admissions, but some schools also conduct the interview with alumni or current students. So it's always good to ask about that as well. So a couple of my tips around the admissions process. First, get to know the admissions team. Admissions folks are usually pretty extroverted. We usually really like to get to know people. We're talkers. And so, you're never bothering us by reaching out, calling us, sending us an email. We want to get to know you. So don't ever feel like you're bothering us. Don't be shy. That's what we do. Our jobs would be really boring, frankly, if people didn't reach out to connect with us. So you can do that through a variety of ways, attending different events, setting up time to talk, shooting an email. It's all really great ways to get answers to your questions. And then it also shows your interest. So I think that it kind of helps you get that leg up a little bit, so that we know how committed you are. And then spend some time getting to know the school. So again, this can be done through a variety of ways. You could ask to do a class visit, maybe talk with a faculty member, ask the admissions office to speak with a current student or an alum. You don't have to find those connections on your own. Any good school with a good admissions team will have people ready and willing to speak with you as an applicant. And then visit campus, get a feel for what it's like, go during the class times. So if you're a full-time student, go during the day. If you're going to be a part-time student taking evening classes, go at night. Take a look around, get the feel, get the vibe for what the environment is like. And then financing, Gail touched on this, and it is never too early to start thinking about financing and researching, filling out the FAFSA form for federal aid. All of that is really important. And of course, start saving. So it's never too early to start thinking about that financing. And yes, I just saw in the chat too, some institutions do have virtual tours, and that's a great option, especially if you're looking at programs further away from where you live. That's a great option. Now, general application tips. Some of this I said previously, but I'll say it all again and go a little bit more deeply. So it's really essential that you understand each school's requirements before submitting your application. Usually this is spelled out really clearly on the website. Admissions teams want it to be very transparent, so you know what you need to do. I mentioned academic transcripts and unofficial versus official. Please know too that some undergraduate institutions will mail hard copies, but there's also electronic options. Both of those are usually fine with different institutions. And then most schools do require you to submit transcripts where you've earned 12 or more credit hours. So if you've attended a couple of institutions, just keep that in mind. You might need a little bit of extra time to get that all collected. And then your resume. So I mentioned we want to see in business school a results-oriented resume. So we want to understand what you've done. What results have you driven? What have the outcomes what have they been? We want to know that more than simply your duties and responsibilities. So highlight those leadership examples, quantify results where you can and where applicable. And I think, most admissions team members really do want to see what you've done in undergrad, because that's a good indication of what type of student you'll be like at the graduate level. So if you were involved in clubs or involved in extracurricular activities, my recommendation would be to definitely include that. On the essay portion, this can also be, I would say, a little bit anxiety producing. This is one of the harder components of an application. We understand that. And so some of our advice may seem really basic, but it's important to focus on the fundamentals. Don't psych yourself out. Focus on the fundamentals. Really basically answer the prompt, answer the question. Sometimes it's surprising to say, but we do get some essays that are very vague and don't really address the question. And that's a missed opportunity, because then we don't know you. It's a missed opportunity for you to share your story. So don't be afraid to be too specific. Make sure you are fulfilling the requirements and answering the question. And it's always a good idea to have somebody else read it. No matter how many times you review something, it's easy for you to miss a typo, or something that makes sense the way you've worded it might be confusing to somebody else. So ask a trusted friend, family member, colleague to review your essays before you submit them. And if you're applying to multiple schools, I would say try to avoid the temptation of reusing the same essay. That's where I think students get in trouble of not really answering the question if they're trying to repurpose the same essay for multiple questions. So try and avoid that temptation. Again, I know it is a lot of work, but the essay is a really important piece of the application for us to start to get to know you before your interview. Now, standardized tests. So I mentioned, first of all, understand the requirements, but then also evaluate which test option is the best for you. If you took the ACT or the SAT to get into undergrad, or if you took both of them, you probably know which one you did better on, or which one you enjoyed taking more, which one felt better. It's kind of the same for the GMAT and the GRE. Now, most business schools do accept both the GMAT and the GRE, and most business schools have no preference. So, know the options, but also we always advise students to take a practice test of each and just see where you land, see how you do. And then make sure that you have enough time to study for the exam, take the exam, and then retake if needed. So make sure you're kind of backing into it from the deadline for which you're trying to hit. Unprofessional references and letters of recommendation. So again, I cannot stress this enough. Understand the requirements. Think about it well in advance. Ideally, business schools are looking for somebody who was a current or former supervisor or manager, somebody that can speak about your abilities, about your strengths and weaknesses, and how a graduate degree could benefit you. A couple other tips are: one, make sure that you've talked to this individual about the recommendation or the reference and have given them sufficient time. The best way to get a really short letter of recommendation is to give somebody, a couple days turnaround. Make sure you're giving them, I would say, at least a month heads up to know what they need to do, when they need to submit it, what the format is. And sometimes too, I think a good thing to do would be to meet with them and talk to them about why you want to get the MBA, so that it's really, so they understand, and instead of guessing your goals or motivations, they can really echo those on your behalf. So definitely spend some time there preparing. Now for the interview, again, understand what the style and format is, but usually it is a one-on-one behavioral interview. So by saying behavioral interview, I mean, it's going to be questions like, tell me about a time when you showcased your leadership skills, or tell me about a time when you failed and what did you learn from that. So usually we want to see stories of things that you've done in your career, in undergrad, to get a sense of how you view yourself, how you find opportunities, and where you've been successful. So be prepared to discuss your resume. So to walk through your resume and explain your career. Typically that's something that should take about 2 to 3 minutes. If it takes 15 minutes, you're going to have to really, really practice editing that down. We want that to be fairly quick so that then we can get into it and ask more specific questions. I would say most schools are going to be looking for examples around leadership capabilities. So think of different stories, strengths and weaknesses, and then of course why you want to earn your MBA or your master's degree. So how it fits into your career goals. The other tip I have is come prepared with a few questions to ask at the end of the interview. That shows that you're thinking about it, that you're committed to it, that you're engaged. I think most people end the interview by saying, now, what questions do you have for me? And if a candidate says, I have no questions, it just kind of falls flat, I would say. It just kind of stops the interview right there. It's not necessarily a negative, but it always, it showcases the candidate better if you have a few thoughtful questions to ask. So make sure you come prepared with that. And then how to address a negative. So this is more broad on your application, but if there's anything in your application, for example, a lower GPA, or maybe you have a gap on your resume or a lower test score. So anything that you would perceive as a negative or could be perceived as a negative. Typically schools do have an optional essay portion where you can submit an optional essay really explaining the circumstances. So my best tips on there are be specific, be upfront, don't make excuses, just address it head on, and then quickly explain why you are committed to being a successful student now or being a different type of student now. And so, I think less is more typically with these types of essays, to be really, really direct and upfront. And that's all the prepared material we have. I see there's some stuff going on in the chat, but are there any questions? Gail, I don't know if there's any specific questions in there.
No, I think they've just been sharing some really great resources, some places to go to get some resume reviews from Jack's team. So I'd say definitely read through that chat if you're attending today. You'll get some gems out of that.
I do have one question, Jill, to what you just mentioned. If formerly incarcerated students, is there some sort of steps that need to be helpful to sort of ensuring that they would like to, or is it even an issue when thinking about business school programs?
Yeah, so most business schools will run a background check at some point. So it might be before the admissions decision is made. It might be after the admissions decision. So I would say, of course, be upfront, right? Probably that's a discussion that you want to have before you submit the application. Reaching out to one of the admissions personnel and just asking if you could set up a time to talk for maybe 15 or 30 minutes and explain the situation, explain what happened, explain where you are in your career now, and then ask for specific guidance for that school. Because every school will have different policies, especially depending on the nature. So I think the best thing to do is just start having those one-on-one discussions individually with the admissions folks.
And then also, I think you touched on it, but I don't know if we need to do a deeper dive into what type of resources are available for students who are transitioning into a business program, like in a developed career. So if there's a pivot, from one track to another, do the admissions offices, the graduate admissions offices, are they supportive to that, or should they come directly to the program, or how do you think that would be helpful?
So during the admissions process, certainly a lot of students enter graduate business school with the intention of making a pivot, whether that is in a specific industry or whether that's a job function area. So I think it's important to start raising those discussions throughout the admissions process, because you'll get to know as well how the specific schools can help facilitate that transition. So some of that on the admission side will come through in the essays, of course, during the interview. And then once students are admitted, again, it's going to vary school by school, but I would say most business schools are going to have prep work and different career activities that you're going to be required to do or are strongly encouraged to do prior to actually even starting classes. Especially on full-time programs, as Gail mentioned, you're going to be really starting to interview right away for internships. So you're actually going to be doing some career prep work prior to starting classes. So that can be really beneficial. And then continuing to work with, once you become a student, continuing to work with the Career Management Center on how to facilitate that transition will be essential. Faculty members, of course, are also really helpful in that area, as are alums.
I saw a question come through on the chat, so I think I'll just take that from Isabella. If there's a theological requirement for an MBA at a religious institution, this obviously could depend on the religious institutions. Most, I would say, don't necessarily have a requirement. And it's also good to notice, like SMU, for example, is Southern Methodist University, but we're actually non-affiliated religiously. So something to kind of look into on that side of things too.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification. I think that's one of the things that I think is super important to remember that even though they sound like they're parochial, they're not, or religiously affiliated, that sometimes there is not a requirement for that component to show up in the way that you're requiring that. And that's something that I think is pretty valuable. One thing that I've learned and have heard over and over again, and I thought, one of my favorite, I've met her years ago and we've been friends for a while, but she said this so eloquently. We are hired here at the institution to be helpful to make sure that you succeed. And I think that students forget that. Like, there's a staff of people who actually are there to be helpful. And if they can't be helpful, you need to show up in as often as you can to sort of figure out, like, how do I ask this question so you're understanding what I need help in. And there are resources. And something else that has been mentioned several times, and specifically within the law program programming, is that, and I think this is for business schools as well, like, they need you. I'm going to say need is probably a strong term, but they want you to be successful because your success is their success. And if you get into a sector of business and you rise to the top, that's awesome. And that reports out well for the way that their institution is showing up in reference to the way it's helping students sort of graduate. Something that we're thinking about in reference to this work that we're doing with the graduate schools is, like, how do we build a component to sort of look at successful graduates who are moving into, tribal businesses or tribal councils or tribal administrations. And the reason why we're connected to Southern Methodist University is because one of our former board members, Stephen Denson, who works at the school or works at Cox Business School, is a huge, I'm going to say proponent, but he's like a champion, really. And he's a champion for Native students at the school. And he works diligently at just trying to ensure that you have as much support and as a process of advocacy and just the capacity to sort of find the links that are needed to ensure that you do find the success that you want. And I'm not going to say that you're going to find that type of, like, person, because it is a person at each of the institutions, but you will find a lot of people. That person is going to have a lot of information about, like, how to link you to people. I'm sure that Jill and Gail have had great partnerships with him along the way, just to be really helpful in a specific way to students. And so I think that there's something to think about when you're, examining the school. So I'm really glad that, there are a lot of resources that are available. And Native students sometimes feel like they can't go to those offices because they're not going to be able to figure out, like, how to answer the question, and I think that sometimes if you just ask the question, like, I don't know how to pay for my education, that's synthesized enough that they'll be like, okay, so, like, let's talk about what you're asking. And then they'll get into the deeper conversation about what that means and to be helpful. So any other questions from the audience? Any comments about, is this information useful?
I hope so.
I hope so too. There's just a lot of information, and the conversation can be overwhelming, because when I'll talk about my experience when I was considering a graduate program, there were 3 programs, well, 4, and I'm thinking about 3 programs for a PhD. But when I saw the program that I picked, I wasn't thinking about business. What I was thinking about was, how do I help tribes think about talent development? And then I picked a program that looked at social behavior as the sort of the guiding format into helping businesses orchestrate strategy. And I was like, this sounds interesting, because I thought of all the components of what it takes to make decisions for tribes. And a lot of those are grounded in trauma, and a lot of those are grounded through, traditional and, structured ways of being for those communities. And I was just like, this might be very interesting to sort of take this approach and thinking about change management from a social behavior aspect. And, like, how do you approach it when you're trying to get to, a positive direction or a different direction? So, and, that's the thing and it was a program that fit well. And, I'm now sort of incorporating that into a lot of stuff that we're doing at the College Fund. And I wasn't expecting to sort of think about it that way, and it wasn't like, a specific business type of, direction for me. I see some activity in the chat. I'm going to stop chatting for a minute.
The one thing I would say too, as people are thinking about this, and this is a ton of information, please know that people pursue their MBA and their master's degrees throughout their entire career. So sometimes I think people feel a lot of pressure to do it within, 4 years, 5 years of graduating from undergrad. But there are many programs for individuals that are at every single stage of their career. And I think that's something that's really cool about business school, that even you can be a very successful business person and then earn your MBA, right? It might be harder to do that if you're an engineer, for example, or a lawyer. You can't become a lawyer without earning your law degree. So business is a little bit unique in that way. So, if anybody does feel a little bit overwhelmed, right, please know that, you could do this next year, you could do this in 2 years, you could do this in 10 years, and it would still provide tremendous value to your career, I believe.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because that was one of the questions that I had thinking about the length of programs, because they're not all the same,
Right.
And I don't know if that was the thing, that if you mentioned that, because there are 1-year programs and there are longer programs. But also something that I think that you all touched on briefly, but like, if a person's not looking for an MBA specifically, but wants to get edification, like, can you talk a little bit about certification programming or short-term programs?
Sure. So, and Gail, do you mind flipping back to maybe that first slide, that program comparison that we had in the beginning? I think now that we've gone through the presentation, sometimes when you look at something a second time, you can absorb more of it. So certificate programs and short course programs, that's the column all the way over to the right. These can be really great options if you're looking to gain a very specific skill set. For example, we have certificates in negotiations. So you take a 3 to 4 day seminar style class where, for full days, you are really focused on gaining negotiation skills. We also have one in mergers and acquisitions. So say, for example, you've been working in finance for a while, but you're going to be doing or working on a merger or an acquisition. That might be a really great certificate for you, and that it's going to be very focused on what that process is like, and gaining skills specifically in that area, even though you already know a lot about finance. So they can be really beneficial, again, throughout your career. Kind of think of them as like really targeted micro learning, and a huge variety out there. So online, on campus, evening options, full day options. Some are spaced out over a couple months, and some might be 3 days back to back. So they can really be beneficial. And we actually do see a fair amount of students who have earned a master's degree or an MBA actually come back and get a certificate because they're looking to gain specific skills in a very specific area.
Just want to address the question we had about an MBA versus a master's degree. It's definitely not a stupid question. MBA it is a type of master's degree. So it's a master's in business administration. But it is a little bit different than some of the specialized masters we've talked about, just because it is more of a mid-level or later on in your career. An MBA, employers are really looking for you to come in with some sort of work experience. That way you get that return on investment, that higher starting salary. You're able to contribute into the classroom, whereas not all master's degrees require that experience that an MBA might. And then I saw another question about internships required. Depends on the school. So SMU, our full-time program, we do require a summer internship. It is part of the curriculum. There's credit hours tied to it. Most schools have some sort of internship in the summer for a full-time program, but it's not always a requirement. So some students might have a sponsored company that they're going back to, where they're not going to do an internship, or for a part-time professional program, you're already working, so you're not necessarily going to do an internship. But I would say look at each school individually and see what's required. And then also about sports administration. So most schools will have like a master's in sports management is a popular degree. A lot of times degrees like that might be a combination between a couple different schools at a university. So for example, SMU, we have a master's in sports management. It's one of our specialized master's degrees. It's a much smaller program. I would say maybe Jill might know better than me, but like around 10 students a year do it, I would say. But it's mostly tied through our education school. So it's co-run through the business school and the education school. So students are taking classes at both universities, both schools within a wider university, which is a little confusing to break it down. But most schools will have that. Otherwise, they're looking to do a business degree, get connected with someone in the entertainment industry. It is a difficult field to go into, sports, I would say. It's a lot of who you know and connections you make. It's not necessarily the highest paying industry for that reason, because it's so in demand, but it's definitely possible to either do a specialized degree in that or to do a broad business degree and kind of work your way into it.
Yeah, something I'll add to that conversation, and thank you for asking that question and asking it that way, because I think that, one thing too is that you can do a basic Google search to find out if there is a master's degree for a professional field that you're looking into. I mean, and that's sort of the beginning of that conversation, and we also at the College Fund can be useful to sort of helping you do a deeper dive. There's also a program called, I'm going to put the link in there, I just remembered, Graduate Horizons, which is, it helps Native students specifically dig deeper into their application process, and then works with them to focus on like the topic that they're interested in, and then helps them find programs that sort of match that. For example, I had a student that I was working with, and she was interested in developing Native cultural centers in urban communities. And I was just like, what Gail just referenced, like, oh, well, I don't know if there would be a program that would do that, but there might be programs that allow you to do that type of focus. But we did a search and we found 3 schools, and they were, one was in Canada, one was in New Zealand, and then there was a program in the States. I can't remember where it was, but the program that we found in New Zealand was specifically what she was looking for. And so it's just having to get to a really good, this is another part of this whole process. And this is leading into that personal statement and essay writing, like getting really good. I don't necessarily know if you have to be clear, but getting good about telling your story about like why you want to go to school, because this is a really crucial component to sort of helping everyone else who can be supportive to your endeavor to really be helpful in specific ways. And so that was the one thing that I think that Graduate Horizons allowed, is to give you a couple of days to sort of like be intentional about your thinking, so that you could really tell the good story about like, okay, so this is where I'm going to go and this is what I feel. And if you get there, awesome, but don't hold to, my outcome is that I'm going to get a job working for my tribe as the, comptroller for the casino. Maybe I'm going to go into this field looking, what comptroller feels like. And if an opportunity arises that can be useful to work for a tribe, maybe it'll be a comptroller in some sort of iteration, because you could be the comptroller for the tribe, not specifically for the casino. You could be the comptroller for another tribe. You could be a comptroller for a business that works with tribes, so that way you're opening up the dialogue about how to explore the direction of like where this goes. And how things overlap. That's another thing too that I think is challenging, is that in undergrad, everyone is so focused about becoming a professional that they forget that conversation of fluctuation and flexibility. But in a graduate program, like they're built upon flexibility. Like they don't really like want you to sort of pigeonhole yourself. They're kind of like, you just need to develop skills to be better. And so like, you want to get somewhere, we want to make you better so that you can get there, but like we need to have a little bit more wiggle room in here so that we can explore what it is that you don't know about yourself. And then you sort of dig deeper into that and sort of pull something out. Go ahead,
No,
Gail.
I think that's a great point, Jack. We're not going to make you recruit for the industry you put in your application. I mean, we want you to have some sort of goals and plans. Plan A, plan B, plan C, especially in the world today and the economy, is always key. But if you come in and you take a class in a different industry or a different field, say you come in, you take a business analytics class and you fall in love with it, we're not going to say you can't recruit for that because you didn't put that in your career goal essay. We want you to be successful and happy and land your role at the end of the day.
Great. Any other questions before we wrap up the session today? All right. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Jill, and thank you, Gail, for being here today, and thank you for offering up some really great information. Is there anything else that you guys want to sort of add before we wrap up today's session?
I don't have anything specific to add other than thank you so much for having us. And, you know, like we said, don't be afraid to reach out to us or the admissions teams at whatever institution you're looking at.
And Jill and Gail, can I have these slides to send out to the attendees today? At least they can sort of have that as a reference point, and if they need
Absolutely.
to. Okay, great. Well, with that, thank you all for attending. I hope that it was a great takeaway for you. I know that I am very appreciative of the time and energy that Jill and Gail have given us. And I know that I'm really thankful for all of you who joined today, because this is like one step closer to whatever goal you're pursuing. And I hope that this is a really good edification for that. So thank you all and have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.